right, hi everybody. Today or tonight, whenever you're watching this, I want to take the time to talk about the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And this began as part of UNESCO in the 1940s, in 1948 in fact. And you might remember we mentioned UNESCO before when we talked about the Man in the Biosphere program. And so the IUCN is a joint effort of over 1,400 members of various governments and civil and social organizations, which represents over 160 countries. And in 1964, the IUCN began producing what's called the Red List. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And you can go to their website and you can check out the IUCN and you can check out the Red List. And it's kind of neat to see the various aspects of the species you're interested in and their current status as far as being threatened or not being threatened. So the neat thing about the IUCN is they have developed this very standardized way to evaluate species that's based on quantitative data. So counting or measuring or weighing, that's all quantitative data instead of being qualitative, which is much more descriptive. And this allows for a very consistent process, or a more consistent process, to determine a species vulnerability, and allows other scientists to evaluate and check each other's work, because the criteria again is based on these measurable variables and not just interpretations. So one scientist might look at a particular group of lemurs, for example, and say population has declined by 32%, which is far better and more measurable than saying simply like a whole bunch of them are gone, which is more qualitative and very hard to sort of compare one from another. So the IUCN uses this sort of flow chart to categorize species. And I'll just briefly mention the first category here, not evaluated. So in some cases, there may not be scientists for whatever reason that are studying a particular species. As an example, there are many insects in the world, and the number of scientists studying insects, even though there's a lot of them, there really isn't as many as there are for insects. So it's very likely that you could have a particular group of insects that just have no scientists really studying them, for example. Or the data could just be deficient, meaning they just don't have enough evidence yet to place these in one category or another. So anyway, for the categories in which they do have adequate data on and have evaluated, they have three different categories for putting species in, and each of those categories then has subcategories, and that's what we're going to talk about. So those are extinct, threatened, and what's called lower risk. So the first category is extinct, such as just flat out extinction. So if a species is truly extinct, for example, we talked about the passenger pigeon and we talked about the Carolina parakeet. Those are both extinct. They are not found in the wild, and they are also not in captivity anymore. There's also extinct in the wild, which means that it's not found in the wild anymore, but there might be populations in zoos and places like that. And this is what's happening in this particular case. This is called Sphinx's macaw. This is a really cool small blue macaw from Brazil that has been extinct in the wild. And it was if you saw the movie Rio, the bird in the movie Rio is a Sphinx's macaw. And recently I was just looking this up, and it appears that some of them have been re-released into the wild. But traditionally, as of recently, they're listed as extinct in the wild. We'll talk about what to do with that in terms of quizzes or tests. For now, the Sphinx's macaw is extinct in the wild. And the scimitar horned oryx is another species that is extinct in the wild, but they do have them in captivity in captive breeding programs. And I'm pretty sure I've actually seen several of these at the San Diego Wild Animal Park. Not the San Diego Zoo, which is a different place, which I always have to tell students that it's not the same place, but the San Diego Wild Animal Park has scimitar horned oryx, I believe. They're extinct in the wild. They were from North Africa, but they exist in captivity. All right, the next category in yellow here is what is called threatened. And threatened then comes in three different subcategories. And those are critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable. And as you might have guessed, all of these have to do with some measurable way that they examine what are the risks or odds it's going to go extinct in a certain amount of time, which is what we also talked about with island biogeography in population sizes. We've talked about both of those before, which is one of the key elements for how the quantitative data is evaluated. So critically endangered, a taxon is usually extremely at high risk of going extinct in the wild. And a taxon, just in case I haven't used that term before, a taxon is just any type of name you're using for a group of organisms. So a taxon that is critically endangered is one that's facing very high extreme risks of being extinct in the wild in a very short time in the immediate future. And they use these 5 different criteria: how often they've been seen, how big their geographic range is, predicted decline in numbers of individuals recently, number of mature individuals, because if you have a bunch of young ones, for example, or a bunch of really old ones that are past the reproductive stage of their life, that's not going to do you all that much good. And the probability the species is going to go extinct sometime in the near future. So these are the categories they use to evaluate a particular species. So example of critically endangered would be this black rhino seen here, found in Namibia. You notice in this particular picture, they have removed the horns on the rhino, because that's one of the reasons they're critically endangered, is because people poach them and kill them to get their horns, or by removing the horns, which discourages poachers from taking them. So also in the threatened category, we have endangered, and we also have vulnerable. This black-footed ferret, which we have in the United States, this isn't considered an endangered species, as an example. Vulnerable would be something like this giraffe. Historically, giraffes were all considered one species, and there were 8 or 9 subspecies of giraffes. In general, giraffes are considered to be in the vulnerable category. In the IUCN categories, we also have what's called lower risk, and a lower risk is just like it sounds. So in the lower risk category, we also have 2 different categories. We have the near threatened category. So this is a taxa, again, an animal or a plant that doesn't qualify for conservation dependent status. So near threatened means they're close to being in the vulnerable category. And then we also have species of least concern. This animal here, which you probably never seen before, depending on where you travel to, this is a maned wolf. It's a kind of a small wolf, but it has these kind of long legs, sort of looks like a weird fox and a wolf sort of put together. But anyway, the maned wolf, which is found in Brazil, is a near threatened species. Jaguar are near threatened species. And this ringtail lemur is another one of those, just to point out how these things change. Here I have it listed as near threatened, and I'm going to tell you that a good way, we're just going to sort of remember it that way for our quizzes and exams. So the ringtail lemur fairly recently has just been evaluated again, and it has been moved up to the actually endangered category. Now, in the category of lower risk, we have near threatened, which were the last 3 I just mentioned. And then we have species of least concern. So the mule deer, which we have all over the place in Southern California and elsewhere in the world, has a really huge population size and a big geographic range. That is a species of least concern. The bald eagle is also a species of least concern. However, in the past, when I was growing up as a kid, it actually was an endangered species at one point, but they've done quite well in the recovery of them, and now they're a species of least concern. All right, so for quizzes and tests, just to make sure this is clear, The best way I think to do this is I'm going to have you know the animals and the statuses as presented here. So don't worry about recent changes as far as the quizzes and exams go, because those can change all the time. And I don't want you feeling like you have to look up every single thing and if anything changed. So the examples I used in those categories in the PowerPoint, let's just agree to use them that way because it'll make your life a lot easier.